Here is the panel that we're looking at. So look at the title, how it's laid out here. The panel is called "The Consecration of the Tabernacle and Its Priests." This panel is on the wall of the synagogue sanctuary at Dura Europos. Okay, this panel is specifically talking about the establishment of the first temple in Jerusalem. And we can identify some of the sacred elements. The menorah here. The menorah is the sacred seven-branched candelabrum. And then we have the Ark of the Covenant. That is the chest which housed the Ten Commandments that Moses received before the exodus out of Egypt. These Ten Commandments serve as the foundation for Jewish law and then speak to their agreement or covenant with their God. Now, I want to go back, just hold on one moment, just to establish the Ark of the Covenant and the Ten Commandments within our timeline of the Jewish temples. Hold on one moment. Okay, back to this map. Now, the Hebrews who had been living in Egypt, according to the Tanakh, followed the prophet Moses out of Egypt and settled back into Jerusalem with the commandments that Moses had received from God. These commandments are then housed in Jerusalem, in the temple, in the Ark of the Covenant. Does that make sense? Okay, so Moses, a prophet, receives the Ten Commandments, and then the physical commandments are housed in the Ark, and the Ark is housed in the temple in Jerusalem. Back to our fresco. Okay, here we are back again. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, this is Miss Cortez going off on one of her crazy brain tangents again. No, this goes back to our image here because, see the title? It says the consecration of the tabernacle. Tabernacle, Miss Cortez, what, all these words. Tabernacle is a tent. It is a temporary structure that was used to house the Ark of the Covenant while they were on the move before the establishment of, or the construction of, the temple in Jerusalem. So what we're looking at in this image is after this migration out of Egypt with the Ark of the Covenant, they've now started to consecrate or make this sacred land and build the temple around the Ark of the Covenant. Tabernacle is that movable tent that had been used for so long to house or to protect the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. Now, I want to give you the term menorah one more time because we see it in the with the Arch of Titus, and we see it here. And I want you to remember that this is a sacred candelabra that would have been immediately associated with the Ark of the Covenant, with the temple structure, and the practice of the Jewish faith. Okay, so we're seeing all of these elements brought in together into this painting. Remember, this is the consecration of the tabernacle to make a temple. And notice what the artist has done here. The artist has put the Ark of the Covenant in a structure that should look very, very familiar to you. It straight up looks like a Roman temple or a Greek temple. Now again, interconnectivity. This shouldn't be a surprise because the Jewish people are living in a world that has been taken over by the Greek and the Roman world, and therefore they have been exposed to other temples. They've seen these things, right? And so to use the visual, think of it almost like a visual verb or visual language of temple for their temple is not seen as sacrilegious. The Jewish people have a temple, and so why not use the visual understanding of a temple to represent the consecration and establishment of the temple in Jerusalem? So we see our pediment, we see columns, and not just any columns, Corinthian columns, okay? So you see this hybridity, how everything is connected. So wonderful. I love it. But let's look at the other elements in this space. We have the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, in front of it the menorah, but then we also have this bricked wall. This bricked wall is the gatehouse, or it's the beginning of the courtyard to the temple. So a courtyard, this open space, and then the temple itself. And then around the construction of this temple, we have these figures. One of them is named Aaron. Now, for the Jewish people, this is a very significant person. Aaron is the first Jewish high priest. So here he is, and he's the first priest of the first temple that's being built right now. So he's being highlighted here with the word Aaron. Let's think about this in terms of size or scale. Aaron is like massive in comparison to everybody else. Why? It's not that he was a giant. Why is he so big? Remember that term? Hierarchic scale. So here we're seeing hierarchic scale to let us know who is the most important. He is the largest because he is Aaron. He is the first high priest of the temple in Jerusalem. What about the other elements? We see how the artist created these animals, maybe even just the clothing. Do we see them standing in any kind of position, like contrapposto? Oh. We do see some slight balance of the legs, the shift of the hip. We also see attention to highlights, midtones, shadows. So there's a use of shadows to create depth, to place the figures on some kind of a ground. All right, look at there. There's some shadow. There's also a sense of perspective with the altar table. This is the altar where sacrifices happen, and you see how it goes off into what very similar to kind of a perspective shape of going off into the distance, right? So we have a sense of depth or perspective. We also have depth in the use of highlights, midtones, and shadows. It's not cohesive, but we do see elements of it. This can be connected to the visual references at the same time in the Roman imperial art, because they are alive at the same time. They are of the same period, of the same visual literacy, visual language, right? Those animals are also there to make reference to sacrifice, because what would happen at the altar would be the sacrifice of these types of creatures, okay? Just to further drive it home, this interconnectivity between people, the use of a ground plane, highlights, midtones, and shadows in a sacred space, a painting in a sacred space. Hello, Dionysic mystery frieze. Yes, we see the same use of highlights, midtones, and shadows, a ground plane with shadows to establish them within a space being used in paintings in a room that had some kind of religious purpose or function. We're seeing it here, and we see it in the consecration of the tabernacle and its priests. One more thing. In addition to, I don't know why I highlighted Aaron twice. Oh, I know why I highlighted Aaron twice. Because we can read it. I don't know how many of you can read the Hebrew alphabet, but that is not written in Hebrew alphabet. That is written with the Greek alphabet, which becomes the Latin alphabet, which is the basis of the English alphabet and the reason that we can read that says Aaron. So right away, the fact that we can read this shows some kind of hybridity of life, that the people in this space would not be expected to read Aaron in Hebrew, but would be assumed to be able to read Aaron in Greek alphabet, right? I think that's exciting. Another is their outfits, their costume. The men in this painting wear these heavy textiles, layered tunics. You see that? Let me zoom in. So they have these long sleeve tunics that reach to their waist, and they have at least 2 layers, and then they're belted at the waist. And underneath the tunics, they have these baggy or loose pants that are cinched in at the ankle with these ankle-high boots. This type of dress is typical of the Persians. This is Persian clothing, Persian style. So it might not seem obvious to us now, but at the time, the way that these men are dressed is very much of their Persian or Parthian neighbors. So we see a Greek/Roman temple, and then men dressed in this Persian or Parthian style of dress. This is again speaking to the audience. Those who would be sitting here and looking at this want to connect with the teachings. And so to apply a Greek or Roman temple to the establishment of the Jewish temple, and to have the Jewish people, the Jewish men who would have worshipped around this temple look like, well, the men around Dura Europos. It's so fantastic. I love it so much. Oh yeah, Parthian. And I'm saying Parthian and Persian because many areas within this space still identify as Persian. And as I said before, the Persian Empire is going to continue in various dynasties and forms, and the Parthian Empire is one of those forms. Just because I want to show you another panel, so we were over here, we're going to hop over to this panel. Hold on one moment. I want you to think of this as the establishment or the construction site and then the complete temple. In the area above, we see the movement or the exodus of the Jewish people into Jerusalem to build the temple. I know. Hold on. We'll come back to that image. So there was an exodus. The Jews escaped Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea and into the Levant. The Levant is this area where Jerusalem is. And it is during this exodus that the Ark of the Covenant was housed in that tabernacle, that temporary temple structure. The panel just above, right here, this panel is showing the crossing of the Red Sea. It's the parting of the waters and the movement of the Jews into safety. And you can see the hands of God welcoming them into the Levant. So how does that play into our scene? Where there's the movement through the Red Sea. Here, now they're in Jerusalem and they're building their temple. And then this image is the completed temple. The temple was constructed on a natural rise or outcrop of rock that is referred to as the Temple Mount. So here's another definition. Temple Mount, the navel of the world in the Jewish faith and the site of their most sacred temple. So the mount or the mound is where the temple was located and was, again, the center of their world and therefore is referred to as the navel. This terminology of calling things the belly button or the navel is very common throughout human history. The Romans referred to the city of Rome as the belly button or the navel of the empire. And when you study other regions, cultures, empires around the world, throughout history, they often will refer to their center or capital as their navel, their belly button. It's also really interesting in maps how they will then make that navel or belly button the center of the map, and then it goes out from there. Don't even get me started on maps. I love cartography, map making. I bring up this emphasis of the completed temple because it is this temple that is then destroyed by the Neo-Babylonians, and then when they rebuild on the Temple Mount, it is the second temple that is destroyed by Titus. Titus will destroy that second temple, and with that we see that diaspora or the movement of the Jewish people into places like Dura Europos. Now, Dura Europos is not the only site in the region where we can see Jewish art, and synagogues are not the only example of Jewish art, and so our next artwork is going to be different.